It lays the predicate and the foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer and ultimately to control the weather, and he who controls the weather will control the world.
Question: how many, even now, are concerned about the wider horizon? Does it seem as if absolutely everything is unraveling societally and ecologically? Welcome to the Bad News Broadcast, where you will hear the most dire, breaking, non-political headlines that none of us wishes were so, but that must be fully faced and dealt with, or we have no chance for even near-term collective survival. And those that don't believe it could be this bad, because it just couldn't be this bad, time to wake up. Converging catastrophes are here, and no, the scripted political theater of the absurd won't save us. Definition of the term polycrisis. The concept of polycrisis relates to the accumulation of compounding crises that human societies are facing. Polycrises arise when concurrent shocks and interconnected risks combine to create a crisis even worse than the sum of all its parts. Reality can't be ignored except at a price. And the longer the ignorance is persisted in, the higher and more terrible becomes the price that must be paid. Facts do not cease to exist because they are ignored. Those are words of timeless wisdom from Aldous Huxley. There is a price, and Geoengineeringwatch.org has stated that for the entire decade and a half plus length of our existence, that the longer the current paradigm is maintained, the more immediate and severe the total collapse of everything, everywhere, all at once will be. Keep that in mind. So what do the manipulators of the Matrix have planned in the coming weeks and months? Here's a hint. Read between the lines. New from CNN. Hurricane Beryl just made history, breaking a long list of records. This has forecasters concerned, the CNN report states, about what could happen next. This is just a forewarning of the coming scheduled weather. And that is not to say that the planet isn't so damaged that we wouldn't have severe weather without climate engineering. But once you intervene in the entire climate system, how can any event anywhere be considered natural at that point? Answer: it can't. And yes, what is on the agenda for the Northern Hemisphere summer of 2024 and beyond? And for those that don't yet believe or understand what's unfolding, the planet is broken. Man's intentional global-scale toxic intervention in the planet's remaining life support systems, aka geoengineering, is making all that we face far worse overall. Not better. Not mitigating the unfolding and accelerating meltdown, but further fueling it overall. But again, that is not to discount all the other forms of human damage to the planet. We have been horrible stewards of this planet, and that should never be ignored if credibility is to be maintained. Climate engineering is ultimately about power and control, nothing else. And not only the ultimate covert weapon of population control, but also a means of temporarily masking the true severity of damage already done to the planet, again, from countless forms of human activity, with climate engineering operations at the top of the list. And in the course of temporarily and toxically attempting to hide the damage and unfolding collapse for as long as possible, the weather makers are inflicting exponentially more damage on the planet's remaining life support systems, on which all of our lives completely depend, aka sealing our collective fate. About Hurricane Beryl and its impacts, if you don't believe cyclones can be manipulated and steered, please take the time to search and review Geoengineeringwatch.org hurricanes. Search that. Geoengineeringwatch.org hurricanes. There's about a half dozen reports with conclusive proof of manipulation operations steering cyclones. Remember and consider that the U.S. military first initiated such operations in 1947 with Project Cirrus, and we can all speculate about the agendas and objectives being carried out, but the fact that it's being done is beyond rational dispute. After wreaking havoc across the Caribbean, Beryl conveniently weakened enough to spare the Gulf of Mexico oil pumping infrastructure from any significant damage, no surprise, but was kept strong enough to inflict inland chaos and deliver moisture far further into the interior U.S., where chemical ice nucleation cloud seeding operations provided temporary and toxic surface cooldowns, while much of the rest of the country continued to bake under ionosphere heater-induced high-pressure heat domes, which are utilized, among other agendas, to manipulate upper-level wind currents and thus precipitation patterns. Translation: to turn the western U.S. into a climate sacrifice zone with a constantly maintained ionosphere heater-induced high-pressure heat dome. This atmospheric feature spins the upper-level winds clockwise around the outlying perimeter of the heat dome, and thus any cooler air and precipitation with it. Summary: everything under the high-pressure heat dome bakes. It's like a lid, pushing that hot air down, heating it even more, far more than it otherwise would have. And any atmospheric moisture is transported around the heat dome and back down into the U.S. further east. The moisture is then scattered widely by ground-based frequency transmission networks, and the moisture is chemically cooled with patented processes of cloud seeding endothermic reacting elements that result in temperature whiplash surface cooldowns. And all of this insane climate engineering intervention comes at the cost of an even worse overall warming because of the damage being done. Decimated forests and crops, further destruction of our remaining ozone layer, and a complete contamination of virtually everything, every breath we take. And not to forget the unfolding and accelerating functional collapse of the ozone layer, with climate engineering at the core of that equation, along with rocket launches which tear gaping holes in what's left of the ozone layer. So many bad news weather everything headlines in a moment. But first, let's cut to the chase of what we face with this new report from phys.org, living in a mass extinction, as in right now. It's imperative to consider the headline I just cited, living in a mass extinction. It's not coming, it's here. And even now, the majority of first world populations are distracted with scripted political idiocy or booking that next Caribbean cruise vacation, perhaps on the biggest cruise ship ever built, the so-called Icon of the Seas, just launched this year. The icon of the superheating, deoxygenating, dying by the day seas. The die-off occurring on land masses is the same. How many have ever even stopped to consider that when nature dies, we will die? How many think we don't need nature because Walmart and McDonald's has all the food we'll ever need and ever want? And some actually believe that. Planetary meltdown is now, exactly as Geoengineering Watch and I have tried to warn about at the top of our lungs for nearly 2 decades. From Salon.com, out-of-control heat is making Earth more weird and more deadly. That's the headline. They then state for 13 straight months, global heat records have been shattered. This is unprecedented in human history and perhaps in Earth's geologic past. Remember that. The Earth changes happening now are happening hundreds of times faster than previous mass extinctions. That makes them equally worse. And people have no idea. The report continues, we see increases in deadly heat waves and droughts, but also increased experience of, quote, global weirding, more extreme weather events producing conditions that are entirely new for communities. Wonder what element they're leaving out of the equation. Look up. You'll have your answer. They continue, according to Dr. Ken Caldera, an atmospheric scientist at the Carnegie Institution for Science Department of Global Ecology. What a long title for mass deception. That's what that institution does. Caldera said, quote, we are not beyond the point of no return. Really, Ken? For the record, Dr. Ken Caldera is the world's second most recognized climate engineer. Who does he work for now? Bill Gates. Also for the record, Dr. Ken Caldera is a former Department of Defense scientist who has stated on the record that one of his tasks for the Department of Defense was to design methods of spraying pathogens into clouds to infect the populations below. I've played this audio on this broadcast more than once. Question, is it even remotely rational to think that such an individual is stating the truth when he tries to convince populations that, quote, we are not beyond the point of no return? Because that statement is a blatant, glaring lie that anyone who doesn't have their eyes wide shut and who does any objective research can prove is patently false. Our formerly thriving planet is far past the point of any return. We passed that milestone perhaps 2 decades ago. We will never see what it was in any time frame that matters. Men like Ken Caldera, and I use the term very loosely in his case, are nothing more or less than power structure tools of total deception. They are tasked with pacifying populations till the moment of impact, of total collapse, which is now closer than almost any yet dare to imagine. As collapse closes in from every imaginable direction, as populations are forced to face the fact that the carbon fuel carnival is over and that the climate engineering operations that are so often so shockingly visible in our skies have only further ensured our common near-term demise, as the masses realize that their criminal governments have done this to them without their knowledge or consent, those in power will play far bigger cards than they have already dealt to all too often willfully ignorant and oblivious populations, and all the while, the weather warfare rages on over our collective heads. Not just the geoengineering jet-sprayed nanoparticles into our atmosphere, but the frequency transmission manipulation of these particles, and thus atmospheric pressure zones, precipitation patterns, cyclonic rotations, extreme temperature whiplash, on and off hurricane force surface winds, baseball and softball size hail from the chemical ice nucleation, cloud seeding. The list goes on and on. And there is this, more new news on the not-so-fun fact that everything they spray into our skies settles to the surface where we all get to inhale it. From MSN.com, researchers identify alarming phenomenon associated with over 100 million premature deaths. This highlights the need to understand, the headline says. What is this headline referring to? What don't the so-called experts understand about what's happening in our skies? This next headline on the same breaking research will add clarity, also from MSN and other sources. Experts sound the alarm over everyday threat, more dangerous than drugs or alcohol. We still have a huge gap in our understanding. That's the headline. Now let's go into the context. The results are in pollution, talking about air pollution too, is a major cause of cardiovascular disease. Health News Service Medical Express, upon reviewing recent research published in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology, said the level of pollution is now, quote, a greater health threat than that of war, terrorism, malaria, HIV, tuberculosis, drugs, and alcohol combined. Evidence suggests that the number of people dying prematurely because of these very different forms of pollution is far higher than currently recognized. What a surprise. They haven't told us. They don't want to panic the herd. They continue, it's important that air pollution is recognized as the high alert, harmful danger that it is, and that we work to seek and sustain solutions. Let's start with stopping the intentional dispersion of what we calculate to be 40 to 60 million tons of toxic nanoparticles into the sky annually. The most dangerous kind. The smaller the particle is, the more harmful it is, and when you add harmful elements on top of that, it's truly a lethal mix. Let's add this, previously from BBC. The toxic killers in our air are too small to see. And shouldn't we all wonder what else might be hitching a ride on those nanoparticles? Remember what I stated a moment ago, Dr. Ken Caldera working for the DoD to design methods of seeding clouds with pathogens to infect the populations below? Try not to breathe. The report continues, current pollution meters don't count the very smallest pollutants, nanoparticles, straight from the report. But let's stop and ponder that. As I've stated countless times on this broadcast and other broadcasts over many years, no official air quality testing even looks for the tens of millions of tons of the most dangerous of all, nanoparticles, that are raining down through our atmosphere on an annual basis, let alone disclosing this off-the-chart danger that the vast majority is completely clueless about. If you think it's just an accident, that this dire danger is completely overlooked and swept under the rug, think again. It isn't an accident. It's part of the plan. Official public protection agencies in so many ways appear to exist to hide grave dangers from populations, not to disclose them. Try for a moment to imagine how populations might react if they were forced to face the fact that so many of their maladies are directly or indirectly connected to what they're inhaling with every breath they take and that their children take. And yes, countless forms of industrialized society, particle pollution is absolutely a part of this problem, no question. But how is it even possible that we live in a world that is so dystopian, so utterly and totally dysfunctional, that tens of millions of tons of highly toxic nanoparticle pollution can be sprayed into our skies on an annual basis, shockingly visible in plain sight, pun intended. Elements like aluminum, barium, strontium, manganese, polymer fibers, graphene, surfactants, the list goes on and on. Every imaginable form of respiratory disease is off the charts. Every other commercial on Matrix Media is to peddle a big pharma concoction to treat the exploding respiratory disease epidemic, and the majority of populations continue to play along, continue to pretend that there's nothing to see here. And if you try to provide hard data to them that proves otherwise, all too often the programmed response of, "That's just a conspiracy theory," is belched out without any conscious thought or consideration whatsoever. All of this paints a very clear picture. A picture of a species that, short of a divinely inspired awakening, is doomed to exterminate itself in the extremely near term. In fact, given the damage that has already been done, it will take a miracle for anyone to make it through what's already unfolding. But if you believe in miracles, please don't give up, nor will I. Ever. This is Dane Wigington. You're listening to the weekly installment of the commercial-free, non-political Global Alert News Report, the end of the world as we know it broadcast, brought to you by Geoengineeringwatch.org, the largest and most visited website in the world on the subject of global climate engineering operations, aka weather warfare. Reaching a critical mass of awareness is the only way forward in this fight. I can't stress that enough. And that effort will take all of us. We must reach a critical mass by starting a conversation on climate engineering that leads people to a credible source of data. Geoengineeringwatch.org will continue all of our efforts to be the go-to source on covert climate engineering operations. A conversation on climate engineering can easily be started with Geoengineering Watch awareness-raising materials available on our homepage. Our only goal is to stop the insanity in our skies. Back to collapse, planetary meltdown, and the air we breathe. Climate engineering operations and fallout trigger cascading downstream consequences that continue to pound the nails into our collective coffins. This week, from climatestate.com, record wildfires burn in the Arctic Circle. If you think what happens in the Arctic stays in the Arctic, no, not the case. In so many ways, the polar regions hold the future of this planet in the balance. Let's keep going. Wildfires are sweeping across the Arctic Circle at an alarming rate. According to Copernicus, the European Union's climate change monitoring system, wildfires are sweeping across the Arctic at an alarming rate with thousands of square miles of land already affected. That's this year alone. It's been happening every year worse than the last. They say the devastating fires are fueled by hot and dry conditions exacerbated by climate change and are having a profound impact on the region's delicate ecosystems and indigenous communities. You cannot have a legitimate discussion about climate, anything from any perspective, without first and foremost addressing the climate intervention operations and about the polar regions. And people have been trained over so many decades to think that it's natural to see this filthy, opaque-looking haze over those regions. That is not nature, not natural. They started the global climate intervention operations over the polar regions immediately after World War II. How well is it going so far? Modern man has sown to the wind and is about to reap the whirlwind. And no, it's not just those in power, because they could not do what they do without the active or passive support of the majority population. Please remember that. We've seen the enemy and he is us. We must stop facilitating their insanity and participating in it. Next, from ntnews.com, wildfires smother Western Canada in smoke. How much of the population breathing that? High pressure heat dome, pushing it down, holding it on the surface where you can't escape it. And from space.com, extreme wildfires are on the rise globally, powered by the climate crisis, they say again. Are extreme fires getting worse? Question mark. Yes, they are, the report says, as new research published in the journal Nature, Ecology, and Evolution shows. What a criminal cover-up. The single greatest causal factor behind the fires is the template that's being set with the consequences from climate intervention operations. The source of ignition, different subject. That can be an endless list of possibilities. But what is setting the template for these fires to burn with such ferocity? Climate engineering is inseparable from this equation. Please search the Engineering Wildfires section on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org if you're willing to learn more. From the New York Times, hot nights fuel wildfires in California, complicating containment. The report says climate change is causing more fires to burn overnight, growing bigger, lasting longer, and challenging the fire teams trying to control them. Again, no mention of the climate engineering elephant absolute elephant in this equation. And when you search the engineering wildfires section, specifically if you search wildfires serve geoengineering agenda, you'll see peer-reviewed science study actually advocating for the intentional burning of boreal forests to cause temporary cooling, to mimic the temporary cooling effect of a volcano as a form of climate engineering. That's how insane those in control are at this point. That's how desperate they are. Don't believe me? Please search these titles, search the engineering wildfire section, and look for yourself at these studies. That's all I'm asking. Do some real research. Don't operate with an opinion that you got from whoever in your circle and they got it from someone else and no one knows what they're talking about. Please do some real research. Please. From the UK Guardian, devastation as world's biggest wetland burns. Those that cannot run don't stand a chance. The innocents in the forest, the innocent creatures, trees, so many sentient beings. The report continues. Blackened trees, dead animals, and scorched earth. Early wildfires have already devastated Brazil's Pantanal. This is an ongoing report. And local people worry they may lose the battle to save them. On the current course, they most certainly will lose. This report and so many like it are so incredibly sad and disheartening. Perched atop blackened trees, howler monkeys survey the ashes around them. A flock of rheas, that's a large flightless South American bird, treads disoriented in search of water. The skeletons of alligators lie lifeless and charred. The Pantanal, the world's largest wetland, is one of the most biodiverse places on Earth, and it's on fire. Huge stretches of land resemble the aftermath of a battle, with thick green shrubbery now a carpet of white ash, and chunks of debris falling from the sky. More than 760,000 hectares, that's about 20 million acres, 1.8 million acres, something like that, have already burned across the Brazilian Pantanal in 2024 alone. One of the local inhabitants stated this, quote, "The Pantanal is dying, but we have nowhere to go. Hospitals and health centers are crowded with patients suffering respiratory issues, with children under 5 and those over 60 most affected by the smoke. But while humans can usually flee the infernos and seek medical help, animals perish in their thousands and more. Reptiles and amphibians face the greatest risk, while monkeys die from smoke inhalation, and jaguars, too, have been found suffering with third-degree burns. Deep into the charred wilderness, a team of volunteer animal rescue workers search for signs of life. Luca Moraes, a 26-year-old veterinarian, says, "In 1 week I have already seen hundreds and hundreds of dead animals, maybe thousands, reptiles, snakes, frogs, all the animals that cannot run. They do not stand a chance," end quote. This is so sickening and disheartening, and so many going about their lives as if nothing's wrong while the planet completely implodes and all life on it. How fast are animals dying? In the last 40 years alone, 70% plus conservatively of wildlife has died, has perished. Global insect populations, terrestrial and aquatic, overall down 80 to 90%. Fisheries populations around the globe down 90+%. The pelagic fish populations, the food fish, oceans are superheating and dying. How long does anyone think we are going to be around on the current course? How clear can this be? How obvious can it be? The forest where I live that was thriving 20 years ago is now completely silent. The acorns are falling off the trees right now. They're barely formed. There will be no food in the forest for the bears this year. And I saw this last week up close. 2 tiny cubs, 2 separate families, mother and cub, 10 pounds of small little bear. They're trying to forage for food. What are they going to eat? No berries on the manzanita trees, no acorns on the oaks. Heat that's just relentless, that doesn't cool off at night. It's 95 degrees at midnight with 10% humidity in the forests of Northern California. Nothing can survive long like that. All the trees are dying. All the fir trees are dying, the predominant tree in the forest. And does anybody care? Well, they're watching ridiculously theaterized election stupidity, claiming that if they can just get their man elected, everything will be fine again. How moronic is all this? What does it take to wake populations up and face the oncoming train while there's still a chance to do anything? Please forgive me for ranting, but how's one to hold it back? Watching the entire web of life and the planet's life support systems irreparably decimated and called, quote, progress is disturbing to the core. as are the legions of silent witnesses who say and do nothing in response, keeping their eyes wide shut. I will press on in this fight, no matter what. And to all those that also refuse to yield to the insanity, you have my deepest and most profound gratitude, and you know who you are. It is our collective efforts that can yet make a difference at this late hour. Never give up. Moving on. From AlArabiaNews.com, Greece battling wildfires as heat builds across the Mediterranean. Greek firefighters are battling more blazes as searing heat bakes southern Europe from Spain to Romania. Don't see any of that on the Matrix Media here, do we? Forgive me for changing gears for a moment. The following letter was sent to geoengineeringwatch.org. It is confirmation that even though Tennessee passed a legally binding law to ban climate engineering atmospheric spraying over their state, it seems the regulatory authorities in Tennessee have no intention of enforcing it. This is from Congressman Steve Sutherland, stated July 8th, 2024. Thank you for reaching out about SB 2691, the Tennessee Department of Environment. That's the bill to ban climate engineering, by the way. The Tennessee Department of the Environment and Conservation has notified us, i.e. the congressman, that they will not be enforcing this law. I recommend that you reach out to Governor Lee's office. Thank you for your voice of support on this bill. Here's the office number. This is for the Department of Environment and Conservation in Tennessee. It's 615-741-2001. Thank you for your time, Steve Sutherland. Even with that disappointing but not surprising act from the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation, courageous Tennessee officials like Stephen Sutherland and Monty Fritz did their part. Let's back them up by rattling the cages of the so-called enforcement agencies. Getting bills passed in other states is still imperative. We must fully expose the weather warfare. Only then do we have any chance of stopping it from the inside out. Moving on. More revelations about what the so-called climate science community can no longer hide. Just as Geoengineeringwatch.org has stated for nearly 2 decades, what we collectively face is far worse and more immediate than anything we've yet been officially told. From ClimateCrisis247.com, study reveals underestimated climate sensitivity, implications for global warming and policy action. The report states, researchers have utilized paleoclimate data and sophisticated global climate models to reassess the Earth's sensitivity to greenhouse gas emissions in a study that could redefine our understanding of climate change. They continue, their findings suggest that the scientific community, including the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that's the IPCC, massive cover-up agency, largest scientific panel ever created on any subject in human history, their job is to mask the immediacy and severity of what's coming. They continue, may have significantly underestimated the potential for global warming. Exactly what I've stated for a decade and a half, exactly what I've stated the role of the IPCC was, and its consequent impacts. The study presents a nuanced analysis of the equilibrium climate sensitivity, that's called ECS, and Earth system sensitivity, ESS, to GHG, that's greenhouse gas forcing. The results are startling, they say. Furthermore, the ESS, again, Earth system sensitivity, which accounts for additional factors like ice sheet melt and non-CO2 greenhouse gases, is found to be higher than the ECS, the Earth system sensitivity, currently indicates, hinting that there's even more significant warming potential. And let's add the decimation from global climate engineering operations, which aren't even mentioned here, of course. And now we can see we have an equation for near-term omnicide. And not surprisingly, the report finishes with a deep dive into denial and insanity. They say this groundbreaking study not only sheds light on the underestimated sensitivity of our climate to GHG, greenhouse gas emissions, but also serves as a call for urgent coordinated action on a global scale. What do they mean? Climate engineering. Its compelling evidence and recommendations challenge policymakers, scientists, and citizens alike to rethink their approach to combating climate change, emphasizing the need for immediate and innovative strategies to safeguard our planet's future, like what? Filling the skies with toxic light-scattering particles that destroy the ozone layer, disrupt the hydrological cycle, contaminate everything on the surface, and cause a cascading downstream effect of consequences that's far too long to even begin to go into here. That kind of solution that's been ongoing for over 75 years, since immediately after World War II. And how's that going so far? Total planetary insane asylum, with the vast majority playing along. And I'm not speaking about those that are simply trying to survive every day. I understand that's the most they can do at this point, but there are so many more that could do something but aren't. But we can just adapt to the planet's collapsing life support systems anyway, right? Not so much. From resilience.org. Why adaptation to climate change misses the mark. Let's stop there. There's no point in going any further. There's no level of adaptation that would allow anything to survive on a scorched, lifeless ball of rock spinning through space. And short of a complete course correction, that will be our near-term collective destination, even without the nuclear nightmares that are coming. On top of everything else, not just war, but the full-blown Fukushima-like meltdowns of 442 nuclear power plants around the world. Take the time to watch the shocking to-the-core documentary titled Trinity, the nuclear bomb movie, and you'll get a taste of just how insane our species can be and exactly where we are headed. All of us. We must course correct or die. From thefinancialtimes.com, climate change is pushing up food prices and worrying central banks. End of headline. Again, criminal omission of climate engineering, everything. Biggest single part of the equation, not the only part, as too many mistakenly try to make themselves believe, and that destroys credibility doing that. We've been horrible stewards of the planet, but omitting climate engineering from any of these conversations, criminal. This report says shifting weather patterns and reducing crop yields and squeezing supplies, creating what could become a permanent source of inflation, end quote. For the record, if you think it's bad now, you won't like what's coming. And about the Ponzi scheme financial markets, stock markets, their complete collapse is also coming. That will be the least of our problems, however. Food, shelter, water. That's what the true commodities will be. Frying vast swaths of the planet to chemically cool the Arctic, that's something to keep in mind, because that's part of what's going on right now in the U.S. The blocking of any Pacific cooler air or moisture into the U.S. West, pushing it up and around the high-pressure dome, bringing cooler than normal temperatures to Alaska and parts of the Arctic. They're desperately trying to cool the Arctic, even if they have to kill the whole planet to do it. Does that make any sense? Let's destroy all the planet's remaining life support systems, and of course they get to crush crops and control populations at the same time, to hide what's happening in the Arctic and Antarctica, both. And isn't that just like the pharmaceutical concoction, so-called solution to treat a symptom? And when you listen to the side effects, you can't imagine anybody would want to take that. Side effects that often include cancer, permanent damage, death, everything. And they're playing this happy, giddy music with people dancing around while they're announcing all these side effects. We live in a full-blown asylum. Arctic sea ice volume, the mass, has been and is at record low levels. Whatever else you hear, that is the fact of the matter. And it will get worse quickly as we hurtle toward a blue ocean event. Geoengineering is making the dire threat of this scenario far worse overall, not better. And for those who jump up and down and say, warmer Arctic, that's great, warm planet, we'll all be living in the tropics. Not so much. You want a warm planet. That's exactly what you're going to get if the current trajectory is held. A planet that more resembles Venus than Earth, as massive seabed methane deposits thaw and release once the ice is gone. Think of your ice chest. Everything stays cool until the last ice is gone, then superheating happens. And you can toss a few ice cubes in, then it's not going to matter. Too much thermal energy buildup. And that's exactly what we have. And the methane on the seafloor will then thaw and release, just like the methane that's releasing from the tundra right now. Please search Siberian methane craters and look at those craters happening on a scale exponentially larger on the seafloor. Right now, that methane is migrating into the atmosphere, covering the planet like a layer of glass. Climate engineering operations, industrialized pollution, everything else adding to it. We are hurtling toward a lifeless planet. How clear can that possibly be at this point? Let's keep going. More headlines. This from yahoonews.com. Record low sea ice levels around Antarctica likely due to climate change. Let's stop there for a moment. If the ice is melting, obviously there's a change in conditions, right? Is it getting colder? Is that what's causing the ice to melt? Obviously not. So we need a team of scientists to tell us that the ice is melting likely due to climate change, aka it's getting warmer. It's mind-numbing, absolutely mind-numbing, the so-called science community that we're told to blindly trust. So based on the next headline, maybe the penguins just need to pack it up and move to Australia. From News 7 Australia this week, this new report, millions of Aussies set to shiver through a prolonged cold snap with an Antarctic polar blast expected to send temperatures plummeting this week. And that's the kind of headlines that climate engineers and the controllers love, because people tend to think if it's cold outside my front door, it must be cold everywhere in the world, which couldn't be further from the truth. People need to look a little bit past their front door, don't they? And it's amazing how there's an Antarctic polar blast when Antarctica is in total meltdown, right? They called anything a cold front now. Wherever there's moisture and they chemically nucleate it, that's a cold front. And meteorologists have to know they're lying their backsides off. They have to know. They certainly should all get a link to the dimming. Any contact for a meteorologist you can find, send them a link to the dimming. Ask them to evaluate that. And no matter what they do or don't do, or how silent they are because they're trying to protect their paychecks and pensions, at least you have delivered the message. Now the karma is on them. And at some point, some of them, when they realize they are not getting out of this alive, may show some courage. Portions of South America and South Africa are also being hit with the same chemical ice nucleation, short-term toxic surface cooldowns with patented processes of chemical ice nucleation for weather modification, aka engineered winter. Check the engineering winter section on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org for a deeper dive into this core aspect of climate engineering that very few yet know about and even fewer are willing to talk about, especially those that are even now desperately clinging to the mind-numbingly false, quote, global cooling narrative or, quote, we're entering an ice age absurdity. Those that push this nonsense refuse to acknowledge that the chemical ice nucleation cloud seeding cooldowns are occurring because to do so would be to expose their own, quote, coming ice age or, quote, global cooling conclusions as being patently false, which they are. About the polar meltdown, here's the new study just released from ScienceDaily.com. Take a deep breath while considering the mind-numbing stupidity suggested in this report. Here's the title. Scientists call for, quote, major initiative to study whether geoengineering should be used on glaciers. Again, geoengineering, any human activity to alter the planet's natural life support systems. Report finds many questions remain around technology to address glacier melting and sea level rise. That's an understatement. About their suggestions, listen up. Installing walls, they say, around ice sheets to insulate them from warming ocean water. They say it will take 15 to 30 years for us to understand enough to recommend or rule out any of these interventions, said author John Moore, a professor with the Arctic Center at the University of Lapland. He should have a copy of the dimming too, wouldn't you think? Question, are such so-called scientists that we're told are experts in the field of study, this field, reading Marvel comic books to come up with moronic so-called solutions like giant ocean walls around glaciers, or covering up the whole of the polar regions, north and south poles, with reflective tarps, which they literally have suggested, or somehow magically making Brazil-sized balloons that are somehow magically launched into space to block the sun? And no, I didn't make that up. That's one of the planet-saving, quote, potential technologies put out by those we're told are scientists and experts. Brazil-sized balloons in space. Really? How exactly do they think they can accomplish that? Answer, they have no idea. Are these so-called scientists shooting up or snorting something or dropping acid, aka LSD, and then recording their hallucinations and calling it science? There are loads more off the deep end stupid suggestions from the so-called climate science community. I just scratched the surface with those I mentioned. And do they ever mention a single word about the climate engineering elephant in our skies that's decimating what's yet left of the planet's life support systems? Of course not. Nothing to see here, they say. Move along. And all the while, the rest of so-called industrialized, militarized societies continue about their lives, what's left of them, pretending nothing's wrong. And that even if it was, they tell themselves, the experts will figure it all out with more, better, and bigger tech, like Brazil-sized balloons in space. Good luck with all of that, as life on Earth circles the drain. Back to the ongoing planetary meltdown being further fueled overall by ongoing climate disruption operations and countless other forms of industrialized, militarized insanity. But geoengineering so core to all of it. From Deadline.com, sweltering Palm Springs hits all-time high of 124 degrees as Death Valley approaches Earth's highest ever recorded temperature. That's from this week. From the San Francisco Chronicle, Las Vegas becomes pizza oven as 120-degree heat smashes all-time record. More in Vegas from Fox News Las Vegas. Las Vegas hits 120 degree, hottest day on record. The all-time record comes amid scorching heat wave with temperatures above 110 degrees and often fighting daily records forecasted through at least July 13th. And that, in fact, has already happened. They've had about 5 or 6 days in a row, or 7, each day breaking the former all-time record that was first broken earlier in the week. One after another after another. Does anyone see a trend here? It's happening all over the planet. Forgive me, one more in Vegas from hoodline.com. Las Vegas and nearby cities under siege by record-breaking heat wave. National Weather Service issues warnings. Yes, they are under siege. Ionosphere heater-induced high-pressure heat dome. Covert weather warfare. How is it not considered that? Why would it not be considered that? From sfgate.com, Las Vegas hits record 5th consecutive day. Went over that earlier a moment ago. 115 degrees or greater as heat wave scorches U.S. Northern California, day after day after day of record heat and nights that hardly cool off. Here's from AccuWeather earlier this week. In fact, it was, last Saturday night. And this needs to be stated. This is where I live in the forest of Northern California. And this is a report from Redding. From AccuWeather, blazing sunshine and very hot, temperature breaking the record of 111 set in 2007, and they show the high temperatures 121. That's breaking the former record by 10 degrees, and it's like 95 at night with 10% humidity. That's comparable to Death Valley. How can forests survive in that? How can the fauna survive in that? Answer, neither can survive, and neither is surviving. The die-off is horrific. It's going to accelerate radically fast from here on out. From WFLA meteorologist Jeff Beryl, he says, rare event, competing heat domes. Remember that term we hear all the time now in Southeast and Southwest. Crank out 2 huge all-time record highs. Palm Springs 124, Raleigh-Durham 106, heat index of 118. Mr. Beryl, you should watch the dimming. Hope you do. And whatever you do or don't do afterward, karma's on you, brother. On that note, a couple more parallel reports just to make a point. From NPR, temperature records are shattered as extreme heat grips the west and east coasts. From the script reading matrix minions at the so-called AccuWeather Institution, East U.S. to experience dangerous combination of extreme heat and humidity. That's called a wet bulb temperature. You'll hear a lot more about that soon. And from the Weather Channel Climate Engineering Cover-Up Corporation, record heat on the move, wherever the climate engineers want it to go. From theconversation.com, new study shows mysterious solar particle blasts can devastate the ozone layer, bathing Earth in radiation for extended times. Let's stop there. To clarify first, any mention of ozone layer damage that doesn't first and foremost attribute the vast majority of that damage to climate engineering operations, atmospheric spraying, and frequency transmissions is a lie, a cover-up. The mission of official sources is to blame it on something, anything but the climate engineering elephant in the sky. And next, there may be as little as only 30% of the ozone layer remaining. Every single day that climate engineering operations continue, there is less. Functional collapse of the ozone layer is on our doorstep. Translation, game over. No crops, no fish, no insects, no forests, and soon after, no people. Even if we had no other near-term existential threat, which of course we have many, the decimated ozone layer alone will finish us off if the ongoing source of primary damage isn't halted. Look up. There's your answer as to what that source of damage is. Geoengineering operations. And I'm saddened to announce that the brilliant and courageous scientist who has painstakingly metered and monitored the ever-worsening UV levels for geoengineeringwatch.org over the course of years has passed away this week. I will miss you, Ray. But your work, your contribution to the whole of the human race and the entire web of life will ripple through time. Check the ozone destruction section on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org for recordings of my exchanges with Ray, which contain critically important data that he alone provided to the world. You're listening to the weekly installment of Global Alert News, the Bad News Broadcast, installment number 466, July 13th, 2024. This is Dane Wigington, your host. Global Alert News is brought to you by geoengineeringwatch.org, the largest and most visited website in the world on the subject of climate intervention operations known as geoengineering. Recordings of the commercial-free, non-political Global Alert News Hour broadcast can be found on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org under the recent column and on the Dane Wigington YouTube channel. Geoengineering Watch wishes to express our deepest gratitude to those that have helped us to expand our reach and thus our voice in this desperate last-hour effort to sound the alarm. If you're on our email list, please put us on your email contact book so that our mailouts don't go to the spam files. Please help us to share the groundbreaking documentary The Dimming, which fully exposes the climate engineering atrocities. Now, I believe with 16 million views and climbing fast, many are waking up to what's happening in our skies. This is the A to Z report, the primary tool on this issue. Please help us to get it out to a much wider audience. All the experts, agencies, elected officials, all need to watch this film that contains testimony from former Air Force generals, former Canadian Minister of Defense, former government scientists, atmospheric testing. It's all there. Please help us to expose and share this groundbreaking documentary. The best way to share is by circulating the direct link to The Dimming by email directly from the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. Sharing directly helps us to overcome social media censorship. When viewing our YouTube of The Dimming or Global Alert News or any other Geoengineering Watch video on YouTube, please subscribe, share, and comment, all of which helps us to circulate critically important data to a much wider audience. About reaching those that still aren't looking up, one primary way: start a conversation with Geoengineering Watch awareness-raising materials, which can be found on our homepage. Our only goal, again, to provide activists what they need to move this fight forward. Extremely high-quality printed materials with shocking images, pictures worth 1,000 words, as the proverb goes. We have Geoengineering Watch hoodies, Geoengineering Watch shirts. Photos are on our homepage. We have scannable business cards, bumper stickers, all effective tools to help strike up a conversation on the climate engineering issues. Shirts are easy to wear and they do catch people's attentions. There are images on the front and the back so they can't miss you. Reaching a critical mass of awareness on the climate engineering onslaught is the great imperative of our time. If we can expose it, again, we can stop it from the inside out. We must awaken those that are participating as to what they're participating in, like our military brothers and sisters that are being told they're doing something benevolent, something for the greater good, which couldn't be further from the truth, could it? If you're willing to share a picture of yourself with a Geoengineering Watch shirt or hoodie at some crowded location, please send us your photo so that we can post it as part of our activist compilation, which is now part of our materials page. The images encourage others to make their voices heard in this all-important battle to sound the alarm. And to all those that are steadfastly committed to this must-win fight for all that matters, my deepest and most profound gratitude. Again, it's our collective efforts that can make a difference at this late hour. Moving on. Stay out of the water. Not just in Florida, where almost everything is dead in the water except the flesh-eating bacteria and the mosquitoes. From the USA Inquirer.net, bacteria warning issued for 14 California beaches. The report says these locations were found to have bacteria levels exceeding health standards when tested. There's no safe level of something bad. Been over that in previous broadcasts. What is a safe level of very toxic things? There is none. It's just a matter of how bad it is. And about those mosquitoes mentioned a moment ago from MSN.com, scientists issue critical warning after serious disease threatens to spread across the U.S. borders into the U.S. The storm is coming, folks. That's their words, not mine. Sounds pretty corny for something so serious, doesn't it? The MSN report continues. In the U.S., mosquito bites have always been a part of summertime. Now, they say with rising global temperatures expanding their habitat, deadly disease-carrying mosquitoes are beginning to encroach on southern states. Question, are many of those mosquitoes the new and improved genetically modified kind? You decide. I'll try to hammer out a few more headlines before I run out of time, but there's so much to cover. From severe weather Europe, heat wave intensifies across eastern and southern Europe this week. The blocking high, that's a high-pressure heat dome, there it is again, spreads into East Central Europe, intensifying the heat wave because that's exactly what they do. Search Honest for heaters and learn about them. You will be shocked to the marrow. The new heat wave will bring a much hotter air mass to parts of Europe once the blocking high matures. And yes, the heat is crushing crops. And there's this, after the late season flash freeze, we know what causes that. Chemical ice nucleation operations, everything we test that's a flash freeze zone has elements in it that are related to those patents. This new report of that damage is a case in point. From freshplaza.com, fruit harvest plummets in the Czech Republic. Agricultural reasons over and over and over, flash freeze, flash flood, flash drought, everywhere. Or massive hail crushing vineyards. That just happened, I believe, in France. It's constant. It's not a coincidence. Welcome to engineered weather whiplash freeze-fry scenarios. Overall, there is meltdown, which climate engineering is, again, making worse, not better. From NPR, last month was the hottest June ever recorded on Earth. Oh, wait, that report's a year old. It must be cooler now, right? No. Again, reminder report. This one from Yahoo News. Hottest June on record, i.e. this June, adds to 13-month streak of record-breaking temperatures. The report says it's not that records are being broken monthly, but they are being shattered by very substantial margins over the past 13 months. They say world is in crisis. Every single month breaking the record. From KJZZ Phoenix, NASA map shows temperature up to 160 degrees on Phoenix streets and sidewalks. And what about the kids' playgrounds? How about those temperatures? And I would wager if you had a temperature gun and you went to some of those places and you read temperatures on some of the metal bars and climbing structures for kids, they would be higher still. But no need to worry about the unfolding, accelerating planetary meltdown. From the UK Guardian, this headline, Weather Watch, buckwheat, miracle crop for a future of extreme heat. What a great idea. We can live on Venus or a sister planet to Venus and eat buckwheat and we'll all be fine forever. This recent report is from the UK Guardian also, Plant Apocalypse, how new diseases are destroying EU trees and crops. They say nothing about the toxic rain, killing soil microbiome, killing root systems, intense UV radiation, destroying the trees from the top down, causing them to shut their stomata. They don't breathe, they don't respirate, they can't feed, they can't absorb carbon, they can't release oxygen. None of that mentioned here. Just like the beetles are the source of all the tree die-off here, according to the quote experts, which is a blatant glaring lie. Beetles are a symptom of a sick, dead, dying tree, and the true core sources are not mentioned. From the flatheadbeacon.com, flathead cherry industry sees near total crop collapse after an Arctic front in January resulted in dramatic temperatures, and the fronts are chemically nucleated atmospheric moisture, and they can label it any way they want, and people believe it. It's from the Arctic. They could say it's from Mars, and people would believe that and ignore climate engineering. Total insanity. Freeze killed almost the entire crop. From phys.org, lake and river foams study reveals high PFAS levels, even though underlying water may be less contaminated. What about all that lake and river foam? Think surfactants, named in climate engineering patents and found in our precipitation testing. Surfactants, foaming ocean sides, foaming rivers and streams, PFAS forever chemicals in the foam. What a surprise. Gee, I wonder why everything's dying everywhere. Almost out of time. A few more headlines I want to race through here. From thehindu.com, the heat will kill the economy, but it will kill us first. Next headline from climateandeconomy.com. Endless record heat in North Africa and Middle East. Temperatures are showing here well into the 120s, both locations. Next, extraordinary heat in Russia. Night minimums 86 degrees Fahrenheit. Near Siberia and night in Russia. Think about that, not cooling off at night. Same in Northern California. Again, it was 95 degrees in my forested location on the east side of Lake Shasta at midnight. Las Vegas, I saw 111 degrees at 10 or 11 at night this week. It's off the scale. What will it take to wake people up? Here's more headlines. Extreme weather in South Africa is disrupting tourism. Research tracks the impact on coastal areas. Next, Kenya's dramatic flooding sweeps away a central part of the economy. Its farms, no surprise, ag regions targeted. Pakistan withers under deadly heat and fears the coming rains, drought, deluge scenario. China races time to combat floods and relocate residents. Unbelievable heat in China. These are all separate headlines. Night minimums 86 to 89 degrees in dozens of stations, 9 different provinces. Those are the nighttime minimums, almost 90 degrees. Record summer heat scorches many parts of Japan. Another headline, here's more. Tokyo forced to open cooling shelters as Japan hit by deadly heat wave. Endless record heat in Oceania. It's the cold season in the southern Pacific, yet it's stiflingly hot day and night. State of calamity declared in Guatemala due to flooding, drought, deluge scenarios. From MSM, human deconstruction of tropical forest is much worse than previously believed. All of it, worse than we believe. No, it's worse than they were willing to tell the public, and now it can't be hidden. That's what's happening. Next from BBC, massive floods affect millions across South Asia. South Korea hit by most intense downpour in 200 years, which means the most ever. From agweb.com, flooding across Midwest may have wiped out up to 1 million acres of crops. Wiped out. On the subject of wiping things out, this must be mentioned. From numerous sources, another glaring red flag of idiocracy from our government and the so-called experts that serve it. To save spotted owls, U.S. officials plan to kill hundreds of thousands of another owl species. U.S. wildlife officials are embracing a contentious plan to deploy trained shooters into dense West Coast forests to kill almost 500,000 barred owls. What a stunningly stupid and cruel course of action. Kill the species that is somehow managing to survive it all to, quote, save the species that isn't and won't. Welcome to the planetary asylum. The following is a reminder of a profoundly important quote from Native American Chief Seattle. The earth does not belong to man. Man belongs to the earth. All things are connected like the blood that unites us all. Man did not weave the web of life. He is merely a strand in it. Whatever he does to the web, he does to himself. How can any rational mind doubt such a profoundly simple and straightforward fact? Short of a complete course correction by our species, extremely near-term self-annihilation will be our next stop, our last stop. But so long as we are still standing, we can always make a difference. Consider and remember that each and every individual that our combined efforts helps to awaken matters in ways that we can't yet fully know or even comprehend, but it matters. Who can say what allies we may yet have? This fight isn't over. Check the activist suggestions link on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org for specific instructions on how you can help to move this fight forward. Please, please make your voice heard, make every day count. We are here for a reason. It isn't an accident of fate. Until next week, this is Dane Wigington from geoengineeringwatch.org.